ECS, it's pretty intimidating because I may know how to do the work, but I don't know the processes. I don't know who to talk to. Now, there's a big, nice booklet, okay, that I'm reading, but there's so much information in there. And now we have basically an answer to everything that's imaginable out there. But the challenge is how to find them. And that's where I believe really, okay, ECS Learning Hub will help us with that. Imagine if we're a new engineer coming in, a project manager. Now, what is your role? What is something that you should know? And we just kind of like to bring that all together. But once you're more familiar with your work, the question is, things change. There's new items that you're supposed to learn, new things you're supposed to understand, right? What do we do then? Most of us will go to conferences, try to learn by yourself, try to, learn as you go along, or just bite the bullet and just implement that. That's where we start today, though. Today, we're going to start with green infrastructure. Why is it important? Because it's a first step. ECS Learning Hub is like an evolving creation. We're going to continue to improve this. We're going to update this. We're going to keep it live. And it's not going to be restricted only to project engineers and managers. We're going to start adding other things. We're going to start adding it for inspections. We're going to start adding for our designers, so that there is a central spot where we can all learn, and we have the ability and resources to learn something new. Green infrastructure is something that's important today for us. A lot of us will be seeing that in all of our projects. It's going to be a big thing coming on. We should be learning this. It's important for us to know it. So that's why today I'm asking everybody, if you can, be engaged, ask questions, apply it, because we'll be seeing a lot of this. But the more you learn, the better it is. And we're not going to be restricted only to GI, but it'll be a lot more in the future as well. So thank you for taking initiative. Thank you for being here with us today. But also looking forward to learning more and growing more at the same time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. And now let me introduce you to today's presenters. Today you will be learning from two of our colleagues in LUI, Nilu Mohajirani, Senior Engineer in Stormwater Management, and Adriana Gomez, Project Manager also in Stormwater Management Infrastructure. And now we'll turn it over to Nilu, who will provide an overview of what we'll be covering today before we dive into the content. Nilu?
Sure. Thank you, Adriana. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. We have 115 people on the call, which is great. As Eugene and Adriana mentioned, we will discuss green infrastructure today. We're going to start from some basics, and we kind of tie the basics to our work within ECS in terms of implementation of green infrastructure. And we do cover some basics of the design and construction overview, basically some points that it would be good for all of us to be aware of. And then the next steps, the more detailed design trainings, tools, construction trainings and tools that's coming up. So that's how we're going to start. We're going to start from some basics, some items that are very relevant to our work if we're managing any design and construction GI project, and also what's coming next. Before I start sharing the slides, I just wanted to emphasize that green infrastructure will capture stormwater. It will reduce the amount of water that will end up in our sewers, and it also cleans that water. So less water entering the sewer system, and it also filters and cleans that runoff that it's being discharged from any hard surface roads, sidewalks, and so forth, which will improve our river system and the stream's health in the ecosystem as well. We do really need to understand that, because you cannot just implement GI in a few places and have the result of you're really trying to achieve. It needs to be implemented in a very large scale in the city. That's why we want that understanding and that learning to be across the board in ECS. Yeah, it's part of our resilience program. We do have climate hazards coming at us with hotter days, with more precipitation, larger storms, peak flows coming in more often, and we need to do something about that. And it's not going to be achieved by just a few GI. It's not just GI. You need gray infrastructure. You need your sewers. You need to have those gray infrastructure in place. But GI is to complement those items. It also produce and will provide more green spaces for us. So Adriana will start with some basics on that. We'll cover the basics, definitions, types of GI and benefits, and we will have a few minutes for you to ask some questions on that part, and then I will continue on that as well. So let me share my screen, and then let me know if you can see that. You can see it?
Yes, Nilu.
Perfect.
Yes. Great. So I am going to start from here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure for me today to share what I know about green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is a beautiful thing. As you will learn today, these green infrastructure systems are very simple, but they have enormous potential when built strategically and at a mass scale to transform the city in a very positive way. They will help us to address some of our current critical issues and also to prepare the city for the future. So what exactly is green infrastructure? The term is widely used across different industries. So I wanted to start with a definition for us at ECS. At ECS, when we refer to green infrastructure, or GI, we're talking about an approach to stormwater management that tries as much as possible to mimic the natural water cycle. Green infrastructure are engineered systems that are designed to capture stormwater close to where it falls and filter it and sometimes infiltrate it, reducing the volume of runoff that enters the city's sewer system and improving the water quality before it makes its way into our local waterways. You may also see the term low impact development for stormwater management, or LID, especially in a lot of external documents. And as Nilu was saying, green infrastructure doesn't only have stormwater management benefits, but many other co-benefits that I will mention in other slides. Next slide. So ECS typically builds green infrastructure within the right-of-way, and it is normally bundled with other capital projects, like, for example, road resurfacing or road reconstruction, basement flooding projects. And there are two main types: vegetated GI and hard surface GI. They are both great for achieving stormwater management benefits. And you can see some examples of pictures there in the slide. The vegetated GI have the soil and the plants installed on the surface, which offer many other co-benefits in addition to stormwater management, like, for example, enhancing habitat and biodiversity in the city, carbon sequestration, improving air quality, reducing the city's heat island. And they can also be quite beautiful. But the reality is that in a city like Toronto, we don't always have the space to build them. Hard surface GI, on the other hand, may not have all the co-benefits that the plants and the soil can offer, but they're still great for stormwater management and they have the advantage that they can be used for other urban needs, like sidewalks and plazas, and even vehicular traffic as well. And they can also be designed with different patterns and colors to beautify the city, like those really nice pavers that you can see in the third picture there. They are made with permeable pavement that allows water to percolate. So vegetated and hard surface GI systems look very different on the surface, but as you will see in the next slides, they are actually quite similar in the subsurface. So let's move to the next slide. There are many different types of vegetated GI systems that can be built in the right-of-way. And there's a list there of some of them. But in this slide, I want to focus on two main categories that are commonly built and that are pretty important. The first one is bioretention systems or bioswales, and the second one is stormwater tree trenches. So that rendering on the left and the drawing on the top right are from bioretention systems. They have an inlet to allow runoff from the road to enter the system, and that inlet can be an interruption in the curb from the road. It can be a French trench, or it can be a catch basin. For example, you can see there in the rendering on the left side of the road, where the system was built on the other side of the sidewalk. So we have a catch basin to get stormwater runoff into the system. In the subsurface, we have a stormwater storage area, which is filled with washed stone. We have a layer of soil, which is also called sometimes growing media or filter media, which has to have some very specific characteristics. First, to allow the water to go through or to percolate at the rate that we want. And secondly, for the survival of the plants. And finally, the vegetation also needs to be quite special because it needs to be resistant to the salt of the road, to road pollution, and also resistant to both flood and drought. That vegetation needs maintenance a couple of times a year. So we consider the capacity for that maintenance, and in some cases we just installed lawn on the surface. On the bottom right corner, you can see a stormwater tree trench. Oh, and I forgot to say, bioretention systems also have an outlet that lets water, excess water that could not be infiltrated into the ground below the storage area. It lets it out to make its way into the sewer system again. So the bottom right corner, we have a stormwater tree trench. They also have an inlet and an outlet, and then they work similarly, but they are a little bit different in the subsurface. So they consist of a long wide trench where modular structures are installed. You can see them there in brown in the drawing, and everything is filled with soil where the trees are planted. And you can also install a hard surface on top of everything around the trees that can be used for uses like sidewalks and plazas as well. And that hard surface is going to be very well supported with the modular structures. And tree trenches are not only beneficial for stormwater management, both quality and quantity, but they're also great for the health of the urban trees. And the reason is that, different from traditional tree boxes, the roots of the trees in these systems can grow freely around the structures, and the trees have more access to the soil and also to the water that is directed to them from the runoff. So let's move to the next slide, to hard surface GI systems. Okay, So as you can see in the cross sections, hard surface GI systems are also very similar in the subsurface to bioretention systems. They have the stormwater storage area filled with washed stone. However, they don't always have an inlet because in many cases, they are designed to just capture and percolate into the storage area the water that falls on top of them, the rainfall, or for example, a downspout that is disconnected on top of the permeable pavement system. On the surface for the permeable pavement, in the city, we typically implement one of three types: pervious concrete, porous asphalt, or interlocking pavers. And they all have voids that allow the water to go through into the storage area. And the designer chooses the right type of permeable pavement based on a number of considerations: the use of the site, the constructability, durability, and operational needs. Permeable pavement can be used for vehicular traffic, but they're best suited for low traffic areas that are not subject to high axle loads. And I should mention that at the city, we're just starting to experiment with the different types in different settings. The implemented systems are being monitored, and we're learning tons of lessons that will help us to reduce costs and to maximize durability and optimize and minimize operational requirements. And next slide. So GI systems can be designed for full water infiltration or only retention and filtration. And remember, there's a big difference between infiltration and filtration. As a refresher, infiltration is the process of water entering the ground underneath the storage area into the native soil. Filtration is the process of removing impurities from the water. So in ideal conditions, our dreamed GI systems in locations where we have soil in the sand in the native soil, or we have sandy soils, like for example in the High Park area, the GI systems can be designed to infiltrate into the ground the rainwater that they capture from small and medium storms and basically get rid of the runoff before it enters the sewer system. But in areas of the city where we have clay and are not as ideal in the native soil, like in, for example, most of Scarborough, or if we have rock bed underneath the GI system, we may not be able to fully infiltrate the rainwater that is captured by the system. But those GI systems will still improve the quality of stormwater, and they will also retain the water for some time and release it slowly before it enters the sewer system. And that retention of runoff is very beneficial because we will be helping to reduce, oops, Adriana, there. We will be helping to reduce those high flow peaks that can generate a lot of damage downstream in our creeks and rivers and the lakeshore. And also those systems will help us to reduce the amount of contaminated runoff. So for those systems that cannot achieve full infiltration into the ground, an underdrain is installed at the bottom. Like you can see in those pictures there, an underdrain is a perforated pipe that collects excess water that could not be infiltrated and brings it back to the sewer system. Next slide. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah,
Adriana.
so I might have to just
Oh,
stop share and
sure.
share again. What happened? Okay.
Perfect. So now that you have a good idea of how GI systems work at the site level, I wanted to go back to the big picture and what happens at the system level, watershed-wide or citywide. So we probably all learned the hydrologic cycle at elementary school. But what most of us didn't learn at the time is the enormous impact that the cities have in it. In a natural area, in pre-development conditions, you typically have a lot of plants and only around 10% of impervious cover from rocks and things like that. And when it rains in a natural system, 40% of the water goes back to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration from the plants. 50% is infiltrated into the ground, and only 10% runs superficially as runoff and makes its way into the waterways. On the right hand, we have an urban setting. In Toronto, we have around 50% of impervious cover in the overall city. In downtown Toronto, it is actually around 90% impervious from the roofs and the streets and the sidewalks. There's also less plants, and therefore evapotranspiration is much smaller. And only 35% infiltrates into the ground. So as a result, in an urban setting, we have 3 times more runoff flowing superficially, which eventually goes into our sewer system that transports it to our streams and generates very high flow peaks and a lot of damage. So the more we build in the city, the more runoff will be generated when it rains. The more we will have to keep upgrading our traditional sewer system, and the more our streams will be negatively impacted with the flow peaks. Green infrastructure cannot replicate the natural water cycle, but it is inspired with it and is trying to get close. It is designed to reduce the volume of runoff and to reduce those flow peaks that cause the damage in our streams. Next slide. And urbanization also has a great impact in stormwater quality and ultimately the quality of our streams and the quality of water in the lake. In that picture on the left side, you can see the contamination from the Humber River when it reaches Lake Ontario in Etobicoke. And on the map in the right, the dots represent water quality monitoring stations that have been installed across the GTA by the RCA and the province, the federal government. The orange dots have the highest contamination. And as you can see, they are located in the most urbanized areas. Today, the highest contributor to non-point contamination in our water bodies is actually runoff from urbanized areas. And it is because runoff, before it enters the sewer system, collects a lot of sediments, it collects nutrients, collects salt, and even heavy metals. And those are all very harmful contaminants that end up in our streams. Again, green infrastructure filters the water that it captures, and it also reduces the volume of contaminated runoff that enters the sewer system and that ends up in our streams. Next slide. Urbanization has a huge impact in our streams. Those pictures that you can see there are all from streams in Toronto. And I have to give kudos to my colleagues in the stormwater management team to work very hard every day addressing these type of issues and worst across the city. So again, as I mentioned before, the high volumes of stormwater runoff in the city enter the sewer system, which transports it to gravity to our water courses. And when there's big storms in Toronto, the flow in the in-streams increases excessively, and this generates stream bed incision and bank erosion, which puts our infrastructure at risk. And that infrastructure can be, for example, outfalls like the one you see in the middle picture. It can be pipes, bridges, hydro poles, trails, or even buildings. And the excessive flows with all those sediments and debris also degrade the aquatic habitats in the streams and later in the lake. Again, green infrastructure, when built strategically at a mass scale across the city, can help to reduce these impacts. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking that half of Hazel's team working in GI is trying to get out of business. The other half is working in stream restoration. And you are partly right. Not completely, because it's pretty much impossible in a city like Toronto to recreate the natural water cycle. But we do expect great positive impact in the streams. Next slide. And I wanted to show this really cool example from a case study from the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program from the Conservation Authorities. And it is of a bioretention system that was built on Elm Avenue in Mississauga. So the system was designed to capture the storm runoff from Elm Avenue that, as you can see in the green arrows in the top right picture, are the runoff that enters the inlet. And in the graph on the left, the light blue line at the top represents the rainfall. The orange line at the bottom represents the flow of water exiting the system through the outfall. So as you can see, it's very similar, entering the system through the inlet. And as you can see, it's very similar to the rainfall. And the dark blue line that you see at the bottom, you can hardly see it because it's almost flat. It's the flow of water that is exiting the system. So in a rainfall of 27 millimeters over a 12-hour period, this system was able to reduce the volume of runoff by 79%. So this means that 79% of the runoff from the road never entered the sewer system. And this bioretention system also reduced the flow peak by 87%, 70%, which means that erosion in a receiving water body downstream was also reduced. And moreover, this system was also able to remove total suspended solids by 80%. Of course, depending on the specific local site conditions, depending on the design of the GI system and the type of storm, the GI systems will be less or more effective. Not every system is going to work like this. Next slide. Okay, so let's summarize. Why do we need green infrastructure? We need green infrastructure to build a more resilient, sustainable city that is also more livable. And green infrastructure has many benefits. It manages stormwater, reducing the volume of runoff and enhancing water quality. And as a result, reducing erosion and pollution in our receiving water bodies. It enhances habitat and biodiversity, mitigates heat island effect in the city, enhances the extent and longevity of the urban forest, enhances air quality, helps to conserve energy, and beautifies the city. And of course, all of these benefits have a big impact in improved human health. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk now about legislation, policy, and guidelines. The benefits of green infrastructure are now acknowledged all over the world, and direction for its implementation is coming to us from all levels of government right now. So at the federal level, Canada's climate adaptation strategy promotes green infrastructure to reduce climate risks. And the federal government has offered some pretty huge grants to encourage implementation. At the provincial level, the provincial policy statements requires municipalities to manage stormwater sustainably and to protect natural heritage. And it also provides direction to incorporate green infrastructure. The environment plan encourages the use of green infrastructure for resilience, water quality, and climate change adaptation. And the province also issued a low impact development manual, which is a technical guide for implementing green infrastructure systems. Next slide. And at the city, direction to increase and enhance green infrastructure is also included in various citywide policy and strategies, like, for example, the official plan, the Transform Toronto Climate Change Plan, the city's resilience strategy, the urban forest strategies. And there's two documents that are very important. The first one is the Toronto Green Standards, which is a really great framework for sustainable design and performance. It is specifically for new development, and it requires some very specific stormwater balance targets, which usually need green infrastructure to be achieved. And we also have the one and only wet weather flow management plan, which deserves its own slide and a couple of minutes. So next slide. In 2003, when very few people around the world were starting to talk about the benefits of green infrastructure, Toronto Water, together with the support from TRCA, developed the Wet Weather Flow Management Guidelines, Policy, and the 25-year implementation master plan. And I can tell you, this plan was super revolutionary for its time. The plan considered a watershed-based approach to managing stormwater, meaning addressing stormwater in every piece of land that drains into a stream beyond our traditional sewer system. It gave high importance to public education to help residents to act on their properties. And it was one of the first in North America to recommend a hierarchy approach to reduce storm runoff, reduce flow peaks, and to improve water quality. So in the hierarchy, the plan provides direction to capture as much rainwater as possible right where it falls and manage it with green infrastructure at the lot level before it even leaves the property. The plan establishes that rainwater runoff that could not be managed at the property or at the lot level should be managed with conveyance green infrastructure systems while it flows. For example, along the road allowance with bio swells or infiltration trenches. And finally, only the very small percentage of runoff that could not be managed with green infrastructure in the first and second levels of the hierarchy should be directed to the traditional sewer system and managed with end-of-pipe solutions before it is discharged, like, for example, a stormwater management pond right before a stream, or an oil and grit separator, and finally, stream restoration. The plan is 22 years old now, and it's taken the city longer than expected to implement the vision of the wet weather flow plan. We all recognize that it needs to be updated to reflect current conditions, but the general policy and the guidelines are still valid today, and the work that we're doing is based in many ways in these documents. Next. And more recently, there's been a couple of directions from Council to scale up green infrastructure. In 2013, City Council requested that Toronto Water, Transportation Services, ECS, and city planning work together to develop green infrastructure standards on the right-of-way for implementation in capital projects. And in 2024, just last year, Council requested Environment and Climate to work with other divisions like ECS to include in the future resiliency reports recommendations to increase green infrastructure in a number of spaces like boulevards, streets, parking lots, and also in large-scale flood mitigation projects. So I'm going to leave it there, and maybe next slide, Adriana. And I'm going to stop here before we move to part 2 of the training to respond to any questions that you may have. I see Philip.
Hi. One of the manuals I didn't see mentioned was the streetscape manual. Has this infrastructure been updated to be included in the street, or rather has the streetscape manual been updated to include this infrastructure?
Yeah, I think Nilo is going to talk a little bit more about some of the existing documents, but I don't know if you want to go ahead, Nilo, and answer to this.
Streetscape manual is going to be updated soon. I believe in 2026 an RFP will go out, Philip, to update that manual. And ECS will have a representative for that update.
And Adele?
Hi. I have a question regarding the green infrastructure for the area that it has shallow utilities. Usually the reservoir course for the area that it has clay is quite deep, like about, it varies between 600 to 1.2 meters. And for the area that has sand, it's quite shallow, but it's still deep, 300 to 500 plus the base course and the poorest material. How can we build it for the area, especially that Toronto has a lot of utilities?
Yes, that is one of the biggest challenges in a city like Toronto. And but there's ways to go around the utilities. Nilo and I are working on a number of projects where we are trying to find locations where the utilities don't need to be moved because it's expensive and time consuming, and also being creative. So for example, we have some laneways that have utilities on half of the laneway underneath. So we're only implementing green infrastructure on the other half of the laneway along it, or we skip a piece to avoid the utilities and find a location elsewhere. So far, we've been successful in being able to install green infrastructure in pretty much every road that we're working on. But it is, we do need to anticipate the time that it takes in the preliminary design to find an appropriate location where stormwater management can be maximized at a low point, but that also avoids the utilities as much as possible. And there's also, you can build them on the boulevard, you can build them on the road with permeable pavement or other types. So it's also selecting the right type of GI that works better for the specific location. It can be built on top of some utilities. And in the utilities guideline, I can't remember the exact name, it mentions green infrastructure, and it mentions some of the utilities that can be underneath and the distance that needs to be left on top of them. I don't know if you want to add anything, Nilu?
So one item, like one of the solutions is to work around the GI type that you're selecting. The other item is that some of the utilities can coexist with GI. You don't have to remove or move the utilities to accommodate for GI. You can, but then you need to support it a little bit so that it's not in a saturated area all the time. But some of these utilities that are in a boulevard in the soil, they are always exposed to water, so that there's not much changes there. What transportation is doing right now with Toronto Water, planning, ECS, and so forth, they're actually updating MCR so that GI is being recognized in the MCR document, and we're working with the utility companies to kind of like come up with a solution that A, we can coexist, B, if we're coexisting, how can we protect their utilities? And sometimes you have a GI and a utility company comes in and they want to install a utility in a GI. We don't have many GIs right now, but down the road, we might have we would have tens or hundreds of GI that utilities have to. So it's kind of like that discussion is underway.
Okay.
But yeah, we recognize that utility conflicts are always something to look at.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Adriana, there are actually two comments in the chat area. Wilson Lam left this question. He's asking about the type, scale, and frequency of maintenance work required for vegetated green infrastructure. What is the service life of these generally? Sorry, you're muted, Adriana.
Sorry. So maintenance of the vegetated GI systems of the plants is particularly important in the 2 years of warranty period. Typically, it requires maintenance twice a year, where they need to be weeded, and also there's some of the plants that will die always and need to be replaced. And in terms of the service life of this generally, I don't know what is the lifespan of the green infrastructure systems, Nilu, in the long run.
If they're designed and constructed properly, they can function for a couple of decades, but just proper design, proper construction. And when you're talking about a vegetated GI, in terms of the maintenance of plants, we will touch on that a little bit in this presentation, but we normally engage with the residents and we get some sort of agreement that they do occasional weeding and trash collection. And then transportation, who's the asset owner, and they have their maintenance crew, will actually have their crews coming in twice a year to look at these features as well. And if a plant dies during the warranty, again, that's a contractor's responsibility. But then down the road, for any reason, transportation would replace the plant. And also the first few centimeters at the top of a GI, that's where all the pollutants are. So they don't need to go all the way down and excavate the whole GI. to basically rehabilitate that green infrastructure. It's only the top layer that it's all the pollutants are being stored. They would just remove that and then replace it with the fresh new mulch or growing medium that they need to be. We do have a set of standards for plants, the plants that have been confirmed by transportation and urban forestry. It's on our website. Those are the plants that are more resistant to salt and different conditions. So you have, let's say you have a GI that is basically depressed. You basically have to have a plant that is more prone to drought on the sides, and the one that is at the bottom, it's where the floods, like not the flood, it's where the pool of water will stay, so that water has to be more resistant to that pooling as well. So those are the more plants that are native to Ontario, and they are more resistant to those conditions as well, so that we don't have to replace them as often.
Yeah, and I want to add that, as I mentioned, the growing medium, it's fundamental to the health of the plants and to not having to replace them and maintain them as much. There are specifications and special operation procedures for growing medium, but it does have to be the specific type with the specific characteristics for the plants to survive in the long run.
Adriana, how long do you want to have the questions in between? Some of the questions, like we can take one or two, but I guess we have to continue.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just hear from one more person. Gabor, I know you had your hand raised for a bit.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking my question. And by the way, great presentation so far. I really find the visuals really helpful, even if it's just some of the basic fundamentals. So thanks for making it easy for us to remember how these things are supposed to work. Just kind of related to what we were talking about before, we talked about more of the growing, the maintenance around growing mediums, more in the green space, I'll call it. Has there been case studies or experience maybe with other municipalities who might have a bit more experience in more the, we talk about pervious materials like under sort of, whether it's asphalt or concrete or pavers over time, like beyond a 2-year warranty, because that's, often we end up with that situation eventually, and people will ask questions. Has there been sort of a maintenance plan put together with probably transportation, or are there case studies that how well do these systems perform? Because eventually sedimentation finds its way into those layers as well, and are we expected that those sort of that type of structure will also last a couple of decades? Because one thing that we have, we're struck with is just the inconvenience of, going back and constructing in busy areas and all the chaos of traffic and all that stuff. So, in busy urban areas.
Yes, there is tons of research that is being done in other cities here in Ontario and also in North America, in the States and other places. The industry, also the manufacturers are doing tons of case studies, and STEP, the TRCA, they actually built in Courtright Center in a spot 3 different types of permeable pavement, one beside the other, so that they have exact conditions, and they have been built there for a couple of decades now, I think. And they are comparing one with the other, and they also have pieces that have been maintained versus pieces that have not, and they're comparing the functionality of them. So we have a good idea of how they work, but we are trying to monitor in Toronto specifically with our own conditions what is the best fit for each different type of use. And we're working very closely with transportation services to make sure that they have the right equipment as well for the right type of permeable pavement, and to understand timing and frequency of maintenance and all of that. So it is being considered very, very seriously.
Thanks.
You want to
So
continue?
Nilo, let's continue with the presentation, and then both Adriana and Nilo will try to address Shams and Linda your questions towards the end of the presentation.
Okay. I assume you can see the screen. I can't see you anymore. Okay. So now that we learned about the basics of GI, what are the different types of GI, and what are the policies that basically support the implementation of GI, we're moving towards more Toronto-specific items here. So the first one is the introduction of green streets. The program that we're implementing GI as part of our capital projects, it's called Green Streets. Green streets basically are the roads that include green infrastructure. If you're looking at this holistic, this large scale implementation of GI, in order to really achieve those benefits in a very meaningful and real sense, is to basically implement green infrastructure and green streets pretty much everywhere. GI is green streets scope is normally bundled with other road components, so that we're kind of, in terms of the efficiency of the cost efficiency and also the timeline efficiency, they're bundled with road projects and also any other type of road component that underground or above ground that can be bundled with these projects. New York is way ahead of us. Again, you cannot compare Toronto to a lot of other municipalities. One of the issues is our climate. We have a very unique climate, but we are similar to New York, and New York started implementation of GI a long time ago. I will show you a video from 12 years ago. We are similar in terms of the climate and our cities being old. We're having old infrastructure. We have combined sewer system in our downtown. But in terms of the governance, we're a little bit different from New York because they have actually stormwater fee, which will fund their green infrastructure program. But in terms of just getting an idea of how a large scale GI implementation would look like, I thought that it would be great to watch this video. So it's only minutes. I'm gonna share the video. Second.
With 520 miles of shoreline, the waterways that surround the 5 boroughs of New York City are among the city's greatest and most valuable assets. Each year, millions of people enjoy the city's waterfront and waterways, thanks in part to the work of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP. Over the past decade, DEP has invested more than $10 billion in sewer and wastewater treatment plant upgrades to improve water quality in New York's waterways. As a result, the New York City harbor is cleaner than it has been in more than a century of testing, even as the city's population continues to grow. Over 90% of the harbor currently meets federal water quality standards, but for those waterways that do not yet meet the standards for pathogens, the biggest remaining challenge is to further reduce combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, that discharge a mixture of untreated sewage and stormwater runoff when it rains. On a sunny day, the city's 14 wastewater treatment plants treat 100% of the sanitary waste that is generated by homes and buildings whenever a toilet is flushed or water goes down the kitchen drain. When it rains, the water that hits rooftops, streets, and sidewalks is called stormwater runoff and enters the sewer system through catch basins, drains, or gutters. New York, like many other older cities, has a combined sewer system. This means that stormwater runoff combines with the sanitary waste inside of the pipes. The city's wastewater treatment plants are designed to treat 2 times the normal sanitary flow, but during some rain events, the wastewater treatment plant cannot handle this additional combined flow. In order to prevent street flooding, sewer backups, and serious damage to the wastewater treatment plants, the system may discharge this untreated mix of stormwater runoff and sanitary flow out of the outfalls along the waterfront. This is called a combined sewer overflow, or CSO. CSOs pose a serious challenge to New York City's waterways because of our ultra-urban environment. Over 72% of the city is impervious, meaning that a tremendous amount of stormwater runoff can be generated from our streets, sidewalks, parking lots, and rooftops during wet weather events. In September 2010, Mayor Michael Bloomberg released the NYC Green Infrastructure Plan, an adaptive management approach to reducing CSOs. The plan laid a framework for $2.9 billion in cost-effective gray infrastructure investments and an estimated $1.5 billion in public green infrastructure investments by 2030. In January 2011, DEP created the Office of Green Infrastructure, whose primary objective is to implement the city's green infrastructure program, which will improve water quality, beautify the cityscape, and save New Yorkers billions of dollars over the next 20 years.
Green infrastructure promotes the natural movement of water, and so instead of the water going into the sewer system, it's directed into specifically designed and engineered systems that feature layers like soil, broken stone, vegetation, and water is directed there so that it absorbs into the ground or infiltrates into the underlying soils and prevents it from going into the sewer system entirely.
Right now we're in the process of siting bioswales across the Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Right-of-way bioswales are built in the sidewalk. They capture runoff from the street, road water runoff, and they capture that runoff and then it infiltrates into the soil. Right-of-way bioswales are 5 feet deep. They have a stone layer and a soil layer that is engineered to manage and hold as much water as they can. Each bioswale can hold on average around 2,000 gallons of water. Right now we have 130 bioswales built around the city, and by the end of 2015 there will be thousands of them in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. The DEP is coordinating and leading the effort for constructing the bioswales with our partners at the Department of Parks and Recreation and the Department of Transportation. All 3 agencies work very closely together in locating where we can best place the bioswales and also in the long-term maintenance of the program.
The bulk of our program is building green infrastructure technologies like right-of-way bioswales, stormwater green streets, rain gardens, and green roofs on publicly owned property. So we have many partnerships with city agencies through a green infrastructure task force. And we work with those agencies to identify properties within our priority areas that might be a good fit for green infrastructure retrofit.
For private property owners in combined sewer areas, DEP offers a green infrastructure grant program. To date, DEP has committed over $11 million in the design and construction costs for green infrastructure to be installed on universities, nonprofits, businesses, and affordable housing complexes.
Here in New York City, we face a lot of unique challenges. Over 8.5 million people, tremendous amount of impervious area because of our city streets, our sidewalks, our buildings. What we're known for as New Yorkers is really our city streetscape and our massive buildings. But in terms of the environment and creating a sustainable environment, the issue of managing stormwater presents a lot of challenges for the work that we do at the Department of Environmental Protection.
One of the interesting things that we've done in DEP's program was having neighborhood demonstration areas, as we call it. So this was part of an overall adaptive management approach. We tried to structurally build in what we think is our best practice, which is learning by doing and constant evolution and constant improvement. We have areas that are roughly 20 acres or so. They all drain to a single pipe. We monitor that pipe so that we get a baseline of the sewer flows during pre-construction periods. Then we build a number of green infrastructure installations. We have maybe 20 or 30 in each area. and then we monitor it afterwards. And that will continue for a few years, but we'll get a very good sense of our pre-construction, post-construction stormwater profile and how much of a difference we make. We know these green infrastructure will work. The question is how much they work, for what kind of storm, during what kind of season. A lot of that will go into our water quality planning.
The Green Infrastructure Plan gives us an opportunity to use water as a resource rather than a waste. So we build projects that capture the rainwater as soon as it hits the impervious area. The way that we're building these is through a targeted area-wide approach. And that's one of the things that's really set the city apart in terms of how we're prioritizing our green infrastructure investments. We've identified specific CSO outfalls, sort of the worst offenders that have really high volume of combined sewer overflow coming out of them, or a lot of CSO events happening. And we're targeting our right-of-way bioswale and stormwater green street construction in the areas that drain to those specific CSO outfalls. Ultimately, we want to see a reduction in CSO events at that specific outfall.
This area-wide strategy allows DEP to maintain the flexibility to prioritize investments in the areas of the city and the specific waterways that will benefit the most from the resulting reductions in combined sewer overflows. By installing these cutting-edge green infrastructure technologies, DEP is not only working to absorb the water where it lands, but to enhance the local quality of life by providing shade, beautifying the city, improving our waterways, and building a greener, greater New York.
Okay. Perfect. Just remember, if somebody tells you that GI will solve all the flooding problems, that's not correct. It's not designed to reduce to mitigate the flooding altogether. GIs are designed to capture the smaller, more frequent rainfalls, and we do need to combine green infrastructure and gray infrastructure all together to have a more resilient and sustainable system of infrastructure. Moving on, again, if you've been involved in any of the intake processes, this is actually a snapshot of our 2027 intake. You would see that the Green Street is the program that is for GI implementation. That's the program name. And as I said, it's normally bundled with some sort of road work. These are laneway reconstruction projects, road resurfacing, and road reconstruction. Sometimes in a bike lane projects, GI is basically used, and they're the buffer between a bike lane and the roadway, where you can basically provide that safety zone between the vehicles and bicycles, as well as capturing the road runoff and increasing the permeability as well. If you look at InView, under transportation services at the very bottom, the second from the bottom, that's where the Green Streets resides. Then you can, if you just check off on that, you would see all the Green Street projects that are under design, their future projects, and so forth. In terms of the asset ownership, all the green infrastructure within the city are owned by transportation services, so they're the asset owners. There is a maintenance crew for the GI features. A lot of people are under this impression that we don't have a maintenance crew at the city, but that group was established almost 5 years ago. They do have multiple programs that they engage with different stakeholders and residents as well. They also have a youth program that they basically go to these underserved neighborhoods and they hire and train youth in those areas, and they would help with the maintenance of green infrastructure as well. GI projects are normally funded by both transportation services and Toronto Water. So it's a 50% cost share. The funding of these two divisions are a little bit different, as most of you know. We normally have a business case with Toronto Water for our projects, but in transportation is a little bit different. So we are trying to figure out what is the best way to notify Toronto Water of these projects, because right now a lot of people are under this impression that they are funded by transportation services and they would notify Toronto Water at the very late in the game and when they get very close to their tendering. And basically the budget is not accounted for. So if you are going through intake process and you're finalizing the delivery of Green Street projects, that's the point that for you to notify Toronto Water of this upcoming project so that they can account for the 50% cost share of these projects. In SMI, both design and construction are funded half 50%, 50%, but for other projects, it might be just the construction that it's cost share with Toronto Water. So we're still figuring out all the details on best way to move forward, but please, when you go through intake, that's when Toronto Water needs to be notified. When it comes to design of the green infrastructure, the first thing that we need to do is to basically look at the street typology and see where the GI can be placed. For example, if you have a boulevard, that would be the great space for GI implementation. And when you go through that siting, that's when you go through the data collection and preliminary design. Surveying is important because we do want to install GI where it's the low point and it would have the highest chance of receiving the road runoff. And also we would like it to be upstream of a catch basin, and then any large storm can be basically circumvented and then enters the catch basin. We'll go through geotechnical investigation. For the GI, we do need to have an understanding of underlying soil condition. Some of the native soil in the city are more sandier than the other, especially Scarborough soil is pretty sandy. If you have a permeable soil, it's normally the infiltration is higher than 15 millimeter per hour. You don't need to connect the GI to a sewer system for any overflows. Basically, the native soil is so permeable and is so sandy that can absorb the water like a sponge. So we need to have an understanding of how permeable our native soil is and also where our seasonal groundwater is, because we would need to have at the minimum 1 meter clearance between the bottom of a GI and a high groundwater table. Also, in terms of the utility investigation, again, as Adele brought up this issue with the utilities, we need to have an understanding of where our utilities are so there's no surprises during construction. Again, we always get those utilities that are not on any of the records, but it would be great to have the SUB and in some cases SUA done. The great thing about having a siting at the very beginning of the project is that you can just have these candidate locations for the GI and just focus on the SUA and the borehole investigations on just those areas, so you don't have to do all that investigation across the project length. So when all of that, the data collection is coming together, again, you got to look at, okay, is this my GI type that I selected at the very beginning of my planning stage? Is that suitable? If you have to make any changes, that's when the data collection will help you to confirm your GI type. And then in the detailed design, that's where the accurate sizing will come in. What would be the dimensions of the GI? What's the length? What's the depth? What's the width? Where are the inlets? Where are the outlets? We do need to have an understanding of the width of the inlet. Is it suitable for the amount of water that I'm designing this GI for? And also you need to have that consideration for the safety as well, so that there's no car or vehicle or any bicycle ends up being in your GI at some point. So we have standards for inlets. Take a look at them. They're online for the inlet design. And also the sewer connection. Again, if you don't have a native soil, high permeable native soil, and also if you have a very high groundwater table, that's when you are very limited in terms of the infiltration, and that's when you kind of limited to the retaining of water and filtering that water, and the sewer connection is needed. So there would be an under drain in the storage area at the very bottom of the GI, where the outlet is basically connected to a catch basin. So any of that water that it's not being captured, basically it's not being infiltrated and captured by the plants or soil, it would discharge the system. We normally allow for 24 hours of ponding on the vegetated GI, and that slow infiltration into the system. The reason that you don't want more than 24 hours is that A, you get a lot of complaints from the residents, B, on a very hot day, that would attract a lot of mosquitoes. So that kind of like that gives you a criteria of, okay, how fast my water is going down and do I need it under drain or not. This is a very schematic of the draft decision tree that we put together, and we're hoping to finalize it with all the GI training as that GI design training that coming up next year. Basically, what it does is that it's takes you through that decision making of what type of GI we need to select and what kind of standards I can use to design that GI. So if you have a boulevard, then do I have this much of space and I have these options? And it basically goes through those questions that a designer will go through, and it would help with the designer to go through a systematic approach of selecting an appropriate GI for their existing condition and their project. When it comes to the construction, there are a lot of steps that needs to be looked at. We do have GI construction offered this month. Some of you will attend that one as well, and we're hoping to repeat that training every year. What is really important is that the site preparation, it's always great to have that communication with the contractor at the very beginning of the project and kind of like have that educational piece, because unfortunately for these road contractors that we are hiring, GI and any restoration, any plants, any kind of sod implementation, they are very afterthought, which is not correct, and they don't pay as much attention as they should. So that communication with the contractor is very important. We need to understand the phasing of the construction. Sometimes GI comes at the very end of construction. Ask the contractor, oh, are you going to excavate the GI, isolate it, and then build your road, and then come back and install your storage layer and growing medium? Or no, are you going to do not touch the GI area? You're going to do all that, your road work? Or is that the whole GI work will be happening at the very beginning of the construction? So that communications are very important, that excavation and grading, phasing, it's something to look at. You would have material that coming on site. The storage layer, we call that wash stone, and the under drain installations. It's great that you can inspect those material that are coming on site. Make sure that they do meet our specifications and our standards. And make sure that the storage of that material on site is in a way that it's not contaminated, because if you have a wash zone, it means that there shouldn't be any contamination in that wash zone, but then if they're stored on site for a long at a time, then the contamination will get into the material. Look at the growing medium installation. Look at the final grading, make sure that the GI is installed lower than surrounding area so that it does capture the road runoff. And then the plantings. Are they meeting our standards? Are they meeting the design? And are they being planted in the right season? Again, if you have a roadway constructed at the end of season in November and it's too cold for planting, then the contractor has to come back in spring and then they do that planting. I know it's challenging because you want to wrap up that project, issue your total performance and close the PO, but be mindful of the plantings and a proper season for vegetations and plantings. These are a couple examples of one of the road projects that just occurred in September, October this year. This is basically a laneway that pervious concrete was installed. We are testing and piloting a lot of the standards that we have, and one of them is installation of pervious concrete within the laneways. We do have quite a few projects downtown and the Dundas and Spadina area that we are implementing pervious concrete within the laneways. And we are learning, the asset owner and the maintenance crew are learning as well. And then we're trying to see what would be the proper material, permeable material that we can install in various locations, and then how can we make sure that they actually function and are maintained for their life cycle. The industry is catching up and a lot of new products are coming out, which are lower in terms of the maintenance efforts, and they will function. The functionality is actually improving as well. So, and we're trying to pilot them one by one. So it's a new initiative and we're piloting various models and various products, and we're keeping the records within our group to have those lessons learned documented. Pitfalls, again, material specification and storage on site. You see 5 photos here. The one at the top left is the wash stone. That's where the storage layer is. These kind of like sharp stones that would allow the water to be stored in those void spaces. The one at the bottom is actually the choking stone. So basically between the filter media at the top where the growing medium is and the storage layer at the bottom, we normally install 100 millimeter of choking layer, and that would inhibit the migration of growing medium and soil into this storage layer at the bottom. In the past, we were installing filter media in between the two, but the experience has shown that the filter media will be clogged pretty quickly within the first few months, and our standards actually show the choking layer in order to basically separate the two different materials at the cross section. Construction sequencing is very important. Erosion and sediment control, they need to be set up. We need to have a plan. We need to make sure that the contractor is not discharging any runoff into the system that it's not in function yet. Again, have that plan, have that communication with the contractor, make sure that the GI site is not, if it's excavated, it's not contaminated during construction. Vegetation and plantings, sometimes the contractor is not bringing in the proper growing medium or vegetations. Again, they plant in a wrong season. Please be mindful of that. Again, if you do any SUB or SUA during the design, there might be some unknown utilities on site. That's just the reality of our city, that there are unknown utilities everywhere. There are some practices and some workaround that we can keep the utilities within a GI system. Again, as we install more and more GIs, we would understand and learn more about the construction of GI, and also the utility companies become more flexible with their standards as well. And then we work together to make sure that we are advancing this initiative all together. The types and usage is very important. We don't want the GI site to be compacted just for the fact that we want the water to infiltrate, and then we don't want it too compacted that it's not it's not infiltrating any water. Public engagement, we do have a guide on PPFA website, which is for our engagement and then our communication with the public. When you're going through your project, think about whether or not you need to have a notification or engagement session with the public. Some of that sessions are being led by transportation, but then there might be a project that is so unique within the design that you would like to have a session with the public. So depending on the impact that you're having on that community, those sessions might be different. We do have some templates for council briefing. We normally go to the councils when the design is at final design stages and let them know about what's coming. And we do have templates for pre-construction and construction notices on that guide that you would see the link on the slide as well. And also some example letters for the residents that are going to be impacted by the GI as well. Post-construction, again, the residents, sometimes the residents are involved with the plant's maintenance. We normally go through that notification during the end of the design, and we'll ask them about what kind of plant balance would they like. Are they agreeing with that occasional weeding and trash collection? And also the transportation would have their crew maintaining these features as well. And normally they would help with ECS inspectors and our consultants to inspect these sites during warranty period as well, so that if we are not sure about some of the items, they can help us with some of the remediation and ask of contractors. In terms of tools, this is a website where our green infrastructure standards are placed. You would see drawings, construction specifications, design guide, and life cycle activities on the website. Life cycle activities is a guide for maintenance and monitoring of GI. And when it comes to the monitoring, that's something that it might be looked at during design as well to see what is the pre-construction condition and what are you trying to achieve post-construction as well. In terms of the drawing, all the items that were mentioned in the beginning of this presentation for bioretentions, infiltration facilities, soil trenches, permeable hard surfaces, swales, any monitoring well, check dams, beehive catch basins, they all have standards drawings on the website. I've included the link at the top of each slide. You would see these slides and you have them so you can access the website as well. Also, as mentioned before, we have planting palettes for different conditions. If you have a sunny, half sunny, shady area, we have planting palettes for those as well. Construction specifications, there are standard specifications for pipes, inlets, monitoring wells, pervious concretes, porous asphalt, permeable interlocking pavers, and also for the continuous soil trenches with trees as well. Again, the link is up there. What's coming? Next year, we would have a construction training. Sorry, Adriana, do you have something?
I just wanted to give you a heads up that we are 3 minutes away till the end of the presentation. Just
I only have this and maybe another one. I think this is my last slide.
Thank you.
What's coming? We are actually working with a consultant to develop some guidelines and step-by-step workshops for city staff. Some of you might be involved in those workshops as well. We are aiming to host those workshops mid next year. As mentioned before, we would have GI construction trainings every year. The first set of these trainings is actually coming on November 18th is the virtual training session that would provide an overview of proper construction. And on the 25th is an in-person meeting, which you would have a little bit of site visit of looking at the various GI features as well. We have developed some tools so far, and we will continue to develop those tools as well. I believe the tender spec will be updated in November, and in that new update, you would see a series of GI-related special specifications that would help with the tendering. We are developing a cost estimate for both professional services and construction costs. Again, if you have bids coming in for any of your projects, please contact us so that we can have that incorporated into our tool and get an understanding of the cost estimate until we develop some standard items in PTP or Trimble, so that it's similar to other items, the average of the cost is calculated in the system. And also a GI construction guide has been developed. It would be posted online in the coming weeks, so stay tuned by that. That construction guide can be used by project managers, by consultants, by inspectors for proper phasing and proper installation of GI. And that's it. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you, Nilo and Adriana. And we are at time right now, so unfortunately we won't have time to continue with the Q&A section of today's training, but I wanted to thank all of you for participating today. We hope that you found this session valuable when it comes to introduction to GI. As a reminder, both the presentation deck and also today's recording will be available on the ECS Learning Hub webpage for your reference in the future. You're going to be also receiving a survey email shortly, so please take a few minutes to complete that. We would like to hear from you and gather your feedback on today's session. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to forward them to me, and then I can put them together and send them over to Adriana and Nilu as well. So thank you again, everyone, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.